You are listening to the e-flux podcast.
This conversation and reading of Asian Futurism and the Non-Other was originally recorded in April 2017 on the release of e-flux Journal issue 81.
My name is Stephen Squibb. I'm one of the editors of e-flux Journal. And joining me is, you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Wang. I'm an art historian curator based in New York.
Excellent. And we're here to talk about your essay before you read a section of your essay for everybody. And you were saying that you were surfing the interwebs and the social medias, and you'd seen somebody responding to the essay. What did they say?
Okay, so since it's been published, there's been, I've been getting a lot of love from people liking it and not commenting as much. But today on my way here on Twitter, I had a very long string of response from someone who pointed out that I'm writing from a very China-centric and privileged point of view. And I thought that was interesting to point out because writing this essay, I was very much aware of my biased perspective, but it is my truth and a kind of truth that I can speak to. And what's interesting, and part of the point of this essay is also that even though China is a very prominent part of the art world and widely celebrated for new art industries, there are still old and boring cliches and misunderstandings projected onto contemporary Chinese art or contemporary visual and cultural productions from China. So I think speaking from this perspective allows me to articulate the absurdity of the continued bias better.
Yes, that's interesting because I have friends from Japan and South Korea as well. And they often speak about how their own position is one of privilege in the same constellation. So is there any sort of agreed upon hierarchy of privilege, or is it just about urban, rural? How do you know that, what makes you say that China is the privileged actor in these interactions?
I think I'm saying that more or less too in response to the kind of uncontested notion of the other and otherness as a compromised or crippled perspective to speak and operate within the art world and its limited scope of politics.
I think it's interesting how one of the functions of privileged discourse, which of course gets attacked a lot these days, I think it has its value.
Well, the thing is, people don't consider that China has a privilege problem. They think that we are still subjected to a colonial or post-colonial gaze, which is true, but it's a different kind of condition and conditioning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I think
and China has its own colonial history. So, for instance, in my own professional connection, sometimes you hear Chinese curators complaining about having to conform or being subjected to certain stereotypes. But at the same time, you see them making very crude simplifications of art practitioners from Vietnam or Thailand. And that's something that's always caught my attention. And one of the, actually recent years, there's a really famous and widely watched Chinese film called Lost in Thailand. Its global box office was just second to the Titanic.
Oh, wow.
And it's an exploration of Chinese tourists who are lost in Thailand. It's filled with all kinds of, cultural stereotypes of what Thailand is. The she-males, of course, and then how people behave a certain way. And there's poor imitation of speaking Thai. And this is a very recent film. So that just speaks to the overall condition that I think we don't talk about enough, or it's not on people's awareness enough.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, totally. I think one of the things, this perhaps leads into one of the things you talk about in the essay, which is this concept of Sino-Futurism. What is Sino-Futurism, and how do you see it working?
I don't know what it is. I think the whole essay is trying to problematize this terminology or Asian futurism before it becomes easily packageable or consumable curatorial idea. or academic idea, because once it becomes defined, you can easily plaster it over exhibition titles or books that sometimes, contribute interesting scholarship, but I think is still so new. And there's a lot of misunderstanding still, including myself, how it relates to other kinds of futurism. Are we talking about Futurismo of the Italian, in the Italian context, or, Afrofuturism that came out in more recent times? Like, how do they relate to each other? When we say futurism, what do we mean? Do we mean the same thing? Do we mean the same future?
Yeah, no, and there's an interesting reception history with regards to the Russian avant-gardes in the first half of the 20th century, who often understood themselves as futurist.
Yes.
But because of our own Western association of futurism with Italian futurism, we've given them another name. But in fact, that's how they identified. Futurism has this really long and deep history in the 20th century. It's interesting. What was the experience of writing this essay for you like? Was it cathartic? Did you feel better afterwards, or was it difficult? I mean, did you feel like you exhausted the topic? What was it like?
I certainly don't think I exhausted the topic, but I think it's a good start for me and for others who are thinking along similar lines. And I think that's kind of the benefit or privilege of writing for e-flux, which is being encouraged to write something out of the ordinary and let it flow and have certain ideas come across, even though the rest of it could be heavily biased or garbage. I'm glad I've put my thoughts out there. And if it can generate more discussion, that's all the better. And I think based on the feedback I've received so far, I think it's starting to do that a little bit. And I'm happy and grateful for that.
Well, that sounds great. Well, why don't we get to you reading? And thanks so much for coming down.
Thank you. I'm reading an excerpt from my essay, Asian Futurism and the Non-Other, published in the 81st e-flux journal. I started the essay with 2 quotes that you might find interesting. The first one is a tweet-length sci-fi written by Da Gu 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 Ji, a popular Weibo user who generates incisively absurdist, trolling, yet provocatively relevant memes, on November 11th, 2015. It goes, in the Chinese version of Star Trek, Liu awakes from prolonged cryogenic sleep and discovers a note. Welcome, Lao. Lao is the Cantonese version of Liu. In the next 5 years, he will be in charge of the spaceship alone, and the long dark nights will be lonely. Hopefully, the delicacies will console your soul. Go check in the fridge. Captain Li Damao. Lao opens the fridge, only to find endless arrays of dumplings. The Cantonese food he had packed is long gone. Lao, a lonely Cantonese dude in the universe. The second was overheard and perhaps incorrectly transcribed from Rax Media Collective's performance, The Last International, in 2013. We meet again for the first time at Tahrir Square. We meet again for the first time at Zuccotti Park. We meet again for the first time at Taksim Square. In February 1989, the year the World Wide Web was born, Liu Cixin, author of the widely celebrated space opera Three-Body Trilogy, published his debut sci-fi novel, China 2185. The story fast-forwards to a future Chinese society burdened by an aging population, largely kept alive mechanically. A new president, a 29-year-old woman who was recently divorced and lost custody of her child, has just been inaugurated and is immediately challenged by a curious series of events that quickly snowball into a national crisis. Mao and 5 other deceased Chinese citizens are accidentally revived as digital immortals and soon began to haunt and compromise the nation's cyberspace, one of the territories most crucial to its sovereignty. In the story, the revival is presented as an inevitable outcome of achieving a technological singularity, made possible by combining advanced 3D scanning in molecular holography with supercomputer programming competent enough to simulate human intelligence. While daily affairs and responsibilities of citizenship are exercised primarily in cyberspace, humans have nevertheless retained their analog attributes. The revived, on the other hand, possess both full consciousness and autonomous human agency, despite their complete virtual existence. Their superhuman capacities for processing mass information instantaneously become crucial in enabling them to intervene and manipulate the digitally calibrated public sphere. Disembodied, they have become truly immortal, an ontologically different kind of human. In a remarkably sophisticated yet eerily prescient manner, Liu Cixin explores how this post-human moment rapidly engulfs social and political life. By 2185, China has become a fully democratic society thanks to, among other things, the sophistication of its virtual infrastructure, which allows the entire population to chime in on important domestic and international affairs. Liu meticulously details the technological parameters of this infrastructure, which is similar, especially in the mechanism for processing and prioritizing input, to what we now understand as the semantic web. He imagines that color-coded visualizations of individual attitudes will provide instantaneous indication of consensus, not unlike the angry face emojis flying over the Facebook livestream of a Sean Spicer press conference. At the emergency meeting called to address the revival, Chinese citizens engage in a heated debate about the human rights of the revived, who were initially contained in isolated digital storage, and vote to grant them full access to Chinese cyberspace, where they soon wreak major havoc. As it turns out, the troublemaker is not Mao, but one of the more obscure men among the revived. During his long lifetime, he was deeply resentful of the progressive ways of younger generations. Having woken up with newfound superpowers, he retaliates by generating enough autonomous derivatives, a kind of human called pulsate, to form a conservative republic within China's cyberspace, ready to overthrow the outside government. Yet, Liu Cixin eschews portraying a teleological evil or even a technological one, which has long been a staple in the mainstream rhetoric of science fiction and techno-orientalism. After the pulsates and their republic are terminated by a costly nationwide power cut, the young president receives a letter from the republic with extensive documentation of its history and aspirations, revealing a particularly poignant aspect of its demise. Since the pulsates communicate and process information at a speed incomprehensible to humans, they're able to form a full-fledged state and a unique civilization within 2 hours, roughly equivalent to 600 years in human time. China 2085 resists the long-standing dichotomy between hard and soft sci-fi to speculate freely on science and ideology as mutually mediating agents that shape social discourse. Written at a particularly fraught moment in China's recent history, Liu Cixin's reflections on humanity, democracy, and nationalism are as trenchant as they are romantic. Significantly, his speculations are grounded in the technological and material realities of the infrastructure of that fictional yet not unlikely future. The computing power required to process huge amount of data, the postmortem encoding of cerebral structures, a national ID system and the way it screens citizens for democratic voting, the experience of information as epistemologically and materially burdensome, the coexistence of radically different temporalities. Many of these elements that resonate with contemporary life are explored poetically as the foundation for new kinds of sublime. For instance, an entire population represented as a holographic constellation in the Great Hall of People, forms of connectivity similar to those found in the sci-fi TV series Sense8, which created the deep empathy characterizing the nation's young. The story does not concern itself with abstract or symbolic representations of power. Rather, it offers a totalizing speculation on technological and hence necessarily civilizational futures from a Chinese perspective. In a recent issue of e-flux journal, philosopher of technology Xu Yu advocated for turning technology into a support for culture, rather than merely studying it. Heidegger invokes the ancient Greek term techne, reminding us that technology belongs to the bringing forth, to poiesis. It is something poetic. In its capacity to reveal, Technology unveils ontological truth and discloses the circumstances in which humanity finds itself. Just as Liu Cixin has demonstrated in novel after novel that any singularity event in the realm of technology is necessarily a singularity event for humanity, with profound ramifications. Thinking about speculated futures like China 2185, primarily in terms of racially oriented identity politics, can be a hindrance, if not an insult, to the genre and its conceptual magnetism. The identitarian bias at the heart of Western political thought is too anthropocentric a scope for such critical inquiries. The question that is repeatedly posed these days seems to be, how can we imagine a future with this or that received identity as a dominant cultural political force? While these speculations often rightly reinforce or complement organized efforts of resistance and social justice, they're also limiting and susceptible to BuzzFeed-style ideological consumerism and curatorial topicality. What we lack are culturally specific and intellectually rigorous speculations in which identity politics may or may not play a significant role. The rage over Hollywood's casting of Scarlett Johansson in the new iteration of Ghost in the Shell is certainly justified. But wouldn't it be a more effective strategy to render Hollywood and its regressive politics obsolete by diverting critical attention elsewhere and expanding the scope of references with which we accumulate momentum for real paradigmatic change? A Hollywood adaptation of Ghost in the Shell should just be original homage to the Japanese classic and full multiculturalism rightly taken at cheap face value. To think that Hollywood, or any other highly visible, immensely powerful American, European, or dare I say Chinese institution is anything but provincial, or that it is any real benchmark of cosmopolitanism, assumptions that continue to underlie debates on representation and identity, is delusional and unproductive. In 2014, when the art world embroiled itself in year-long celebrations of the internet's quarter centennial, there were ample and thoughtful reflections on its multifaceted legacy, tracing the trajectory from early net art to post-internet. Yet the fact that the World Wide Web has never been worldwide, a fundamental reality for anyone living outside Europe or North America, was scarcely acknowledged or explored. Not that being late to the game has proven to be disadvantageous. On the contrary, the later a nation arrives at mass internet culture, the more nimble and innovative its adaptation tends to be, as the tech world has long acknowledged. In contrast, the rhetoric of belatedness still permeates and is still resisted in the global discourse on modernism. If a fact as germane as the uneven global distribution of the web can be lost in the thicket of glaringly familiar, entrenched, and uncontested assumptions, one can only imagine the precarious trajectories faced by other intellectual and artistic inquiries in the long postmodern, post-medium, post-colonial moment we still find ourselves in. More awkwardly, as curators and scholars working on modernism have come to treat their subjects with greater care and thoughtfulness, studying the languages, problematizing the historical frameworks, charting multiple temporalities and forms of ownership, many otherwise intelligent people working with contemporary and particularly digital materials seem to operate with the astounding illusion that the interconnected world is indeed flat and flattening. Entirely too much evidence testifies to the alarming assumption that somehow art practices as volatile as quicksand can be captured by retaining vast networks of advisors and translators on safari-like research trips. The search for the next exotic frontier has already exhausted the Earth's surface, in every sense of the word, and we're reduced to waiting for the inevitable Antarctic biennial. Naturally, attention has shifted to the speculative realms of cyberspace and science fiction. And this is where things start to get tricky. Just as it has been more or less established that there are multiple modernities, the temporalities of the post-internet condition are, by nature, even more erratically stacked. The illusions of instant accessibility and simultaneity mask the elementary reality that time functions differently, radically so, across the web. The Chinese language alone, for instance, exhibits a remarkable range of temporalities in cyberspace. Antiquarian usages are still broadly employed, both earnestly and sarcastically, while new semiotic spaces and topic-specific discourses, evident in digital subcultures and nimble censorship circumventing strategies, are being generated with exhilarating speed. Korean, Japanese, and English terms are swiftly and pragmatically borrowed without translation, absorbed and put into wide circulation, mutating through life cycles that span a matter of hours. This crucial significance of linguistic structure as an exogenous influence on internet discourse explains why even the most vigilant proponents of the post-internet discourse on art failed to grapple with any area of cyberspace mediated by languages rather than major Western ones. Consider the simultaneous and accumulating commentaries floating across online videos. These bullet screens enable real-time production of languages and syntax. The distortion of time-space that, according to the theory of relativity, occurs at very high speeds, a popular sci-fi trope seen in films such as Interstellar, may not be too far-fetched an analogy for the experience of different linguistically and culturally specific cyberspaces. The post-internet condition only accelerates relativity and differentiation. It is a fundamentally linguistic condition, not simply in the sense of language, but also because it concerns what is in circulation and how specific forms of circulation mediate meaning, including that of visual materials, especially those not conspicuously characterized by internet fashionableness. This is why, when dealing with cultural production informed by these new temporal and semantic algorithms, translation has never been less effective. It can't keep up. There is guaranteed semiotic breakage at every interpretive turn. Speaking the language isn't enough. One has to speak the meme in order to meaningfully participate, even as a spectator. The Englishness, English in the linguistic sense, and Britishness, British in the cultural and ideological sense, of Bodie McBoatface, for instance, can never be meaningfully translated. Fluency is no guarantee of comprehension when memes become ever more culturally, politically, and linguistically specific. Such an intricate set of specificities creates different kinds of representational politics, which are too often reduced to post-colonial thought and American racial dynamics, both widely mistaken as universal. Curatorial or academic efforts to find digestible, local manifestations of the dominant post-internet rhetoric usually end up finding no more than preconceived spectacles. Of course, anyone can try to understand Chinese cyberspace without speaking the language, but it would be nearly impossible to fathom its quirks and glitches, to say nothing of its heart of darkness.